Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Wrestler Weekly Conversations. Again, you can get us at Wrestler Weekly, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You might already have, or you might want to get the book, Family Bacon Wrestling by Scotty Richardson. You can get that on Amazon. Don't forget, we have our Pro Wrestling Tees shop as well, Pro Wrestling Tees / Wrestler Weekly. Season 3 of Conversations. We have had such a great ride. So many good episodes passed and still some more coming for you. But here with us today from the Kings of Pro Wrestling podcast, from the Roll Up podcast of the great Phil Singer Games. If you know me by now, you know I'm a huge fan of Phil Singer Games. We have Sam Fain with us joining us today. Sam, thank you so much for hanging out and coming on to talk a little wrestling today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and I'm looking forward to it. Obviously wrestling is a big part of my life, and having, the King of Pro Wrestling podcast has kind of faded into the background. There's still some content that I want to produce for it, but obviously with Phil Singer Games and Roll Up, I still get the opportunity to do a lot of wrestling related stuff, obviously.
Yeah. And we'll start right there. So we're going to focus today on the Legends of Wrestling card game. But they also have, if you're a fan of independent wrestling, I mean, some of the top indie stars in the entire world, and even some folks who have gone on to be stars of AEW and WWE. You can get these cards and have those dream matches. Also, too, for those of you who are into comics and stories, you might remember from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the advertisements for Champions of the Galaxy. And that's where this really all started. But for me, what hooked me in was in 2003, they came out with the initial Legends of Wrestling set. I remember how excited I was to get that box in my hand and have these dream matches. So wrestling is one of those things that has always been a good escape for me, something that has always been something I can turn to. And I can remember being young, and getting into tape trading. So my dad would tape all the current stuff, all the WWF, WCW, ECW at the time. And all I wanted to do was to trade that for the territories. Stuff from before I was born, or stuff from when I was just young enough not to remember it.
Right.
So I grew up on the footage early. So let's talk about, Sam, what's the wrestling that really hooked you, got you into professional wrestling, and made you a fan?
Well, I grew up child of the 80s. I was born in 81. And by the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I had already, consumed my first bit of wrestling.
Okay.
And it was definitely, that era was dominated by WWF. And in particular, where I was at the time, we were in Kansas City, or suburb of Kansas City, and a lot of what you were getting on TV at that point was pretty much all WWF content. There was you could go to ESPN and maybe see like some AWA. I think World Class perhaps.
Yeah.
And then definitely TBS for like NWA. But I fell in love with Hulk Hogan. And that was really where it started for me. And I think that my real earliest memories involve Saturday Night Main Event with Hulk Hogan versus Nikolai Volkov
the flag match, right?
The flag match. That's like my earliest concrete wrestling memory. And then from there it was just, how much can I watch? And I eventually, it couldn't have been too long after that, I eventually got to see some NWA, and I'll never forget my mom, who was a big wrestling fan. And my mom is kind of the person that helped sort of get me into it a little bit, because she had worked at a bar as a waitress in Minneapolis after high school. And because back in like the 70s, like the drinking age in most states was like 18. So this is before it bumped up to 21. So she was able to work in this bar, no problem. it was where a lot of the AWA guys came after the shows in Minneapolis. So she would tell me stories about, meeting like Bobby Heenan and Andre the Giant, and then of course like Jim Brunzell and some of the other guys that used to come in that were AWA based. So she had these great stories, and she also just had kind of a love of the business too. And I'll never forget, I'm watching this moment and I see somebody get posted, and I want to say it was Ric Flair, but I could be wrong about that. And the next thing I know, they're bleeding. And I've never really seen that before, because WWF kept it fairly clean. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like even in my brain, my like 5-year-old brain at the time, I knew enough to use these words, which, even today, I probably wouldn't say it this way, but like, I was like, whoa, this is real. And I think after that, it wasn't too long to where I shifted, like, I had to watch TBS. I had to watch, NWA Main Event. I had, even after it became WCW, I was really following that a little bit more than I was WWF. Until Bret Hart won the heavyweight championship. And then when Bret Hart won, I was like, because I loved Bret, even as the Continental champ. But when he won,
Bret was great.
Yeah, when he won the world title, that was when I think I was just kind of all in on WWF. Until, of course, the NWO formed, and then I was like, I was a Nitro convert until until the Austin era started, and then I was back to Raw. I was watching both, because TNT did the thing where they re-aired Nitro, so I would watch. So I'd watch Raw live, and then I'd watch Nitro, in the replay. So
best way to do it. It's so funny because I have a very similar background to you. Now, I grew up in New York. And it was WWF mania, you know what I mean? It was the Macho Man Randy Savage lived in my hometown of Staten Island.
Wow.
So it was a big connection. So I'm born in 84. So again, by the time I'm like 3 or 4, by 1987, I am hooked and start to have memories of my first, again, was the first tape I remember my dad ever taped. It was a Saturday Night's Main Event. It was from November, I think, of 87. It was Hogan and Bundy from Seattle. And oh man, like that was the big thing for me. Again, Hogan was a big one. But again, we had the NWA, AWA, and World Class on. And I remember my uncle and my dad were the big wrestling fans. We would go at a young age. I would go, they had this deli and had this Optimo cigar sign up top. I'll never forget. And just the most giant magazine rack you've ever seen, and we would get 5, 6, 7 magazines every month. And there I am at 4, like looking through these magazines, like, you know what I mean? I didn't even know I could fully read yet at that point. I was just hooked by the photography and the pictures and all that stuff. And then, you have the LJN figures come out, and that's a big part of it, the AWA set. And so I was well versed in the WWF, the NWA, and World Class hooked me real early because they had the Legends of World Class shows. So by 87, 88, World Class was really on the decline, but they would show. So I had seen already by that point, Kerry beating Flair at Texas Stadium.
Nice.
I'd seen that tape. I had seen, Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams smash and Kevin Von Erich's Lincoln, after the big 12-man match. The Great Kabuki scared the bejesuses out of me. You know what I mean? Just things like that. My first crushes were Miss Elizabeth and Sunshine, so it was already. And then as I got into like probably about 11 or 12, I started to order the back magazines from the earlier 80s, 83, 84, 85. And I noticed there was all these territories. Memphis was another one I got into early as well, which will segue into that a little bit. But they used to have the Wrestling Gold VHS series. Which they released on DVD like 20 years ago, and Cornette and Meltzer did the commentary on it. It was really, really cool. But there was a lot of great, and again, on that tape, the second match on the tape is Hulk Hogan and Jerry Lawler from Memphis. And I'm like, oh, this is incredible. So I started to search out those tapes. I started to search out Georgia and Mid-South and the UWF and all these places. So I wanted to consume everything. And so I had always had this love for the legends of wrestling. So again, I would always see the champions of the galaxy, and it just never did anything for me. I was just like, I'm not into comics, and it just wasn't me. It just didn't. But then when Legends of Wrestling came out and I saw the names and I saw guys like Greg Valentine and King Kong Bundy and Bobo Brazil and Buddy Rogers, the Road Warriors and Jimmy Snuka, Harley Race, all these guys. And I was like, I remember the old Superstar Pro Wrestling ads, that card game.
Sure.
And I've always been intrigued by card and dice games. So when this came out, this is like a match made in heaven.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's for me, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated was how I ended up getting into it, because I saw those ads like so many people, and so many people have a similar story. But it took me a while to actually finally order it. And I remember I was buying magazines pretty regularly. We'd moved to a suburb of St. Louis, and I was buying the magazines pretty regularly at that point. And I'll never forget this, that I had an issue that had Davey Boy Smith on the cover, and it was covering his Intercontinental title win over Bret Hart at SummerSlam. And that issue in the back had one of those ads. And the funny thing is I didn't order right away, but that issue, for whatever reason, like, in the stack of magazines, it would float to the top again, and I'd flip through, and that was the one that I actually cut the order form out of and mailed it in. And this is after we'd moved to North Carolina, and because I'll never forget this, it was April of 1994, and I sent that form off. And the thing that kind of hooked me, because I'd thought about it as a kid, I was only about 13 at the time, but I'd thought about it, even a few years before, I think. And the thing that finally kind of really got me to say, I'm going to do this, was the fact that the wrestlers changed. Like in the ad, it talked about, like, wrestlers get better, they get worse, they retire, they rookies come in, all this. And I was just sort of like, that just sounds really cool. The story changes and grows, it's not static. And so that was kind of what did it for me. And that's awesome. And that first night I got hooked. And I, early on, I had a tendency to, if I wasn't happy with a dice roll, like I would just ignore it or whatever, to try and force things to go the way I wanted them to go. But by the time, certainly by the time Legends came out, I'd been playing at that point for almost 10 years. And I, I grown out of that and had so much fun just kind of seeing where the dice would take me, and where the stories would kind of develop on their own, independently sometimes of what was in the books. Because kind of like I like comic books, I like science fiction, but I never saw that being a part of my wrestling world.
I get that.
So I typically would kind of steer away from some of that stuff when it was, if it got a little too sci-fi or whatever. But Legends, like you say, when Legends came along, it was so easy to connect with, because it was just like, this is everything I've wanted, because I love this game system, I love the style of this. Now I get to do it with wrestlers that I know and love, which was huge, and all credit to the Legends team for the way that they've been able to craft the cards, because you've got a really good, hierarchy, where like Harley Race is going to be tough, no matter who he's facing. But like, then you're going to have somebody like Playboy Buddy Rose, who's going to solidly fill that mid-card role as a singles wrestler, but might bump up to like upper mid-card or so when he's in the tag ranks. So it's everything works so well,
It does. And again, like you said, the dice kind of really dictate what happens. I mean, you've had it where I see a lot of times people, I did this match, I did Buddy Rogers against like Virgil, and Virgil won the title, and now I'm mad, but I learned to, if I don't want that guy to ever win the champ, because I'd really try to treat it as a shoot. I use the rankings, this guy, and again, I do story driven, but I also do like, this guy's a hot streak, so let's see, so-and-so's really won a lot of matches. That would be a really good, intriguing match. And then I create a story of, why would these two guys be wrestling outside of? So again, it like puts that emphasis on championships and wins and losses. And but that's what I love about it, is that you can treat it however you want. And the dice, like you said, will take you to a different thing than maybe you were planning. And a lot of times you're like, oh, this is a really cool twist,
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too is I love, kind of developing your own promotions is setting up a good solid mid card, for
Yeah,
instance, because
absolutely.
it's, sometimes it's easy with the glut of names that we now have to have like those main eventers. You've got Jack Briscoe and Bob Backlund
Yeah.
and
Oh,
Kurt Angle, and
amazing.
in addition to Harley Race and Buddy Rogers
Yeah.
and Lou Thesz, it's like this is an incredible amount of talent. But often, I'll maybe only have 2 to 4 of those guys in my
Yeah.
promotion, but then my mid card can be really pretty expansive, and it
Yeah.
allows some really interesting feuds. Like I've kind of fallen in love with 2 cards that really fall under that mid card: Bobby Shane and Bill
Yeah.
Dundee. I
Oh, yeah.
love, and I had a feud between the 2 of them recently.
Yeah.
And it was just so much fun to play out because there is so much unpredictability when you've got those
Yeah.
kind of more evenly matched cards.
Yeah.
And it just led to a lot of fun stuff. And that's just one of my favorite things about the game. And like I said, I don't necessarily, it's hard for me, it sounds kind of silly, but it's hard for me to treat it as a shoot. And yet
Yeah.
at the same time, that's how I want it to appear. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
Like,
get that. Yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of like that hybridish, and that's more what I need. That hybrid, like it's still wrestling. Like you
Right.
still need those stories. You still like it's not like a complete shoot, but like so the shoot element helps me. Like if Buddy Rogers beats a guy in 40 seconds,
Yes.
wow, man, he got that guy on that night. It was a bad,
Right.
and it could lead to a rematch. And again, if he squashes him again, then all right, he just can't beat Buddy, but it could build to something later, But then other times, man, you have those matches that are those classics that go, you're like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, man, this guy's got, both of them have like 11 pins. The next one
Right.
is the one,
I know, I completely agree. And it's, one thing that I'll even say about, real world wrestling is I do wish, and it's something that I never would have really seen myself saying, like even 5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But I do wish that now, especially because I love AEW so much.
Yeah, same.
I don't necessarily think that everything is perfect, but I think that more often than not, they're hitting home runs, which says
Agreed.
something.
Agreed.
1000%.
1000%.
But one thing that I would love to see a little bit more of, and they've come close to it on a couple of occasions, is to have a couple of those matches that are over in like a minute, that you don't expect to go a minute. And I mean,
yeah.
I'm all for, Hangman Page and Bryan Danielson going an hour.
Phenomenal.
Like, yeah.
Phenomenal match.
But every once in a while, it would be kind of cool to see, Bryan Danielson, for instance, go out there against somebody and just knock them out in a couple of minutes.
Well, and that I think has been the appeal of somebody like Brock Lesnar, and you'll have detractors of that. But
Sure.
again, I think they could have followed up more with the Kofi Kingston story. Like, man, he already squashed Kofi tonight, but man, there'll be another night,
Right,
But again,
right.
even he squashes John Cena. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's just, it was like, wow, it was shocking. And it gave it that big fight kind of component that I think was missing.
Yes. And I think that it's got to be tough when you're the one putting those matches together, both as a wrestler and as a booker or promoter, because you want to see the story kind of unfold in the ring.
Absolutely.
You want to have that 15 to 20 minutes at least, if not more, to give it that. But it would be, because the audience is so conditioned to expect that, in particular from like a main event, to go like 30 minutes, it would be kind of neat every once in a while to see us, subvert those expectations, because it's what we see so often in MMA. And I think that the truth of the matter is that professional wrestling has absolutely, I mean, now it's kind of a non-factor, but there was a point in time when I believe there were a lot of wrestling fans that went to MMA and they never came back. And I'm not saying you could ever win them back, but I certainly think that you could kind of almost recondition the fan base in a way to expect things that felt a little bit more real.
And I think realism, because again, right, you take a look and you want those elements of realism, but you also want to be able to say, okay, like I can let go of this a little bit and believe that, like, so it's a hard hybrid to kind of nail. But you want, Johnny Valentine said it the best, right? They might not believe that this is real, but they'll believe I'm real.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's funny because Chad Olson, who is on the Legends team
Yeah.
for Filsinger Games, he sent me this wonderful book that he had compiled, that Larry Matisic had put together, which is basically, just a complete set of results from the St. Louis Wrestling Club,
Oh, that's
from like,
fantastic.
going back to, like, I think the 60s or something. Might even go back a little bit further than that, through the early 80s. And one of the things that I noticed early on, because I started to almost unconsciously pattern my promotion, my Legends of Wrestling promotion that I run the game with, after the St. Louis
Yeah.
event. And so as I was kind of going through and when looking at some of these results, I was realizing that while they didn't do exactly, kind of what we're talking about here,
Mm.
it seemed like Sam Mushnick kind of had a bit of a handle on that, because you'd see some main events, which most of them were 2 out of 3 falls,
Yeah.
where the first fall would end in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Now the
Yeah.
second fall might be like 20 minutes,
Yeah.
but there were definitely occasions where you would see, like one of the 3 falls, or sometimes the cool thing was is they didn't always go 3 falls. Like every once in a
Yeah.
while, it would be 2
It
straight
was too
falls.
straight. Yeah.
And that kind of mixing it up, because
Yeah.
he was a promoter that wanted it to feel very real.
Yeah.
I think that by mixing it up, the fans, the fans were not, there wasn't the expectation
Yeah.
always that my main event has got to be, 30 minutes. It's got to have,
Yeah.
45 near falls. It's got to have, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. The kind of cookie cutter
Yeah.
thing that we expect wrestling to be now.
Which, hey, I mean, I'm one of those people that expects that, and I love that.
Oh yeah, and it has its place,
Right.
for sure.
But every once in a while, to have those expectations subverted in a creative way, I think would be something that it's definitely underutilized. I won't say it's completely, it's not utilized, but I definitely think it's underutilized for a lot of promotions out there.
Absolutely. When you take a look back at how many main events, right, didn't have a finishing move attached to it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And today and again, they've now do 30 finishers a match, which again, which whatever, but like it's interesting to see. And that's why I love when like a Phil Singer match ends in a roll up, or it ends in in some kind of counter. You don't know how it's going to end. You might hit an innocuous move and I saw this, oh man, it knocked the wind out of him, it got him for a 3. You know what I mean? And then you can build around that. AEW recently did this with Miro, with the neck, right? And the DDTs.
Yep.
They played off of that was a weakness and that could knock him out. And so it became Fuego del Sol's, he was really good at DDTs. So, this is an interesting matchup. Plus you had the layer of the story. This is a guy who doesn't have a contract. He has to win to get the contract. Right. So again, it was just wrestling well done. And again, like you said, it's not saying, AEW always does great. You know what I mean? WWE last night is telling a great story and by the time you guys see this will be, not last night, but recently with Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns and this story. And it's been excellent. So again, when you weave the story in with the aura of, man, Brock and Roman are really tough to beat. I mean, these were 2 guys who feuded 5 years ago, and it was a much different feel. You know what I mean? And so it just goes to show you, when you build like that, you give those things and you creatively enhance and you want to bring people in. That's I mean, it's gold.
Yeah. I know. I completely agree. And that, that type of the thing that is, it's kind of one of those watchwords these days is long-term storytelling. And the fascinating thing to me sometimes about professional wrestling is it's not necessarily that every storyline has been planned out from year 1 through like year 6 or whatever. It's the idea that, and this is something that, there are a lot of promotions out there that aren't very good at this, but it's the idea that I'm not going to forget what happened in year 1. And if I can capitalize on that 5 years from now or whatever, I'm gonna. And that, and that too, to kind of weave it back to the game real quick too, that's one of the things that I love about building your own promotion, is it gives you the opportunity to do that. There have been a couple of things that I've been able to do with, like, Bob Armstrong is a great example recently for me. He'd been like my television champion for a while, and I felt like it was, starting to get just a little bit stale, because nobody was beating him. And I was mostly, it was mostly like undercard guys because it's more of an undercard title, but he's obviously, he's a little cut above some of those guys.
Absolutely.
And what would inevitably happen is that there'd be like a time limit draw, or he would win. And the spoiler, which I love. Don
love the spoiler.
Yeah, and I love his card, and the guys did such a great job statting that card. Had been at one point like my top champ, my territorial champ, and he was on the shelf with an injury, and it hadn't been Bob Armstrong that injured him, but they had tussled before Armstrong ever won the title. Okay. So I decided, I was like, Armstrong had this open challenge, and without even really planning it, he happened to hold the belt long enough that when the spoiler came back, the first match I decided to have for the spoiler when he came back was to challenge Armstrong for the title, and he beat him. And so it's like, the dice cooperated with me.
And when it works like that, you're like, oh, great.
Won, right. But it really kind of helped play off with the fact that they'd had this, this feud, way back, and now here they were, in this match for this title, and the spoiler's coming back after an injury, and like stuff like that can happen, whether it's real life or in the game or whatever. I love little things like that, just and I think that obviously there's a lot of promotions out there that do that sort of stuff, but the territories, I think, one of the things that always amazed me about the territories is that they never forgot what someone had done, like left for a while, and you mentioned Austin Idol, I think before we started recording, but like Austin Idol's a great example of that, because he'd come to Memphis, he'd stay for about 6 months or so, and then he'd leave. But when he came back, they were able to, whether it was Lance Russell and Dave Brown, or Austin Idol himself talking about it, or Lawler, Dundee, whoever, he was able to pick up that heat right away. Everybody remembered what he had done, a year ago. Which is great. And I think that, it's sometimes it's about respecting your fans, it's about
don't insult their intelligence.
Exactly.
And you nailed it. And that's what I love. So, you mentioned the game, and you mentioned that with Bob Armstrong. Like, I have a very similar thing. So I run a full-on territory system, because I'm the guy, like, I want to find use for every friggin' card. And so what I did is I started it. It was an NWA Fed, and it was 3 Legends territories, 3 indie territories, and 1 women's territory.
Nice.
But what I did was, after running that for like 6-8 months, I said, now the indies are going to break off, and it's going to become the AWA, and they're going to crown their world champion. And then, so there's still going to be some crossover. There'll be cards, but each territory has a different flavor. So they each are designed like a geographical area, and a top of a secondary, and a tag team title. And then once a year I do a draft, and I switch it up,
Nice.
And it's been so much fun, to be able to do that. And so, but the world titles, there's the world championship, there's the world tag team championship, and then there's a world light heavyweight or junior, or a world women's, and the championship advantage is steeper for those. It's harder to win those, and so where a regular regional title, the champion it'll have an advantage, but he won't have, like, I like to decrease the pin rating, and by 2 or 3, depending on what title it is. But it's been fun, and it gives me an opportunity to change things up, do dream matches, and it's just fun, and it's different styles. Like my one indie fed, like, it's kind of based in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. It's more of a British wrestling,
nice.
That rough and tumble Canadian guys, things like that, and guys who are in the Pacific Northwest. So it's funny to take a look at what you do, but it's the creativity that the game allows me to enhance, has become a coping skill for me. And we talked before we came on about, mental health and recovery, and doing things for yourself like this. Like, when I have that time, at night, and I'm playing for a half hour, an hour, and I'm coming up with what I want to do next or whatever, I feel refreshed. I feel recharged. I've kind of re-energized those creative juices. And in that makes me a better worker, a better husband, better father, but just the relaxation and like I said, the great memories that it makes me feel. This reminds me of when I was a kid, and going to the store with my dad and my uncle and being there. And it was just all, man, that was the place where I could be me and enjoy my
Right.
wrestling, you know, and this is what that brings me back to.
Well, yeah, the thing for me, I think it's so easy to connect all of what you just said, because the game has definitely served as that kind of coping mechanism. And I'll never forget this. This would have probably been about 20 years ago on the board that existed before the message board that we have now. Someone was telling a story. I mean, not telling a story, it was their real life, but about how their father was in hospice and didn't have long to go, and he had asked his wife to bring his cards and dice
That's
to the
awesome.
hospice so that he could play while he sat there with him, because he was in and out of consciousness. And that's what he did. And that was the first way I think that it started to connect with me, that and it doesn't necessarily just have to be this game, but these sorts of things can absolutely, whether some people paint, some people write, some people draw, whatever. In this case, we happen to play this game, and it can be very therapeutic. And I know that feeling where sometimes you just feel kind of stuck in your day and whatever. And I know that there have been evenings where the last thing that I really wanted to do was sit down and like play the game, frankly. I just wanted to like sit in bed and watch TV. But once the dice start getting a little dusty, you gotta shake it off. And so and there have been those nights when I'm like, no, I'll roll a match and see how I feel. And the truth is it's like 6 matches later, I've got my card written out. I'm, and literally I'll wake up the next morning and I'll just kind of like, those creative juices will be flowing, and I'll be thinking about like what happened the night before that I want to lead into the next card.
Oh, same.
And it feels good. It makes you feel good. And that's the thing about wrestling too, is I feel like that for me personally, there was a while where watching wrestling didn't necessarily make me feel good. I just wasn't happy with what I was seeing. I wasn't connecting to it. So I kind of got out of watching it. I continued to play the game. I would watch old tapes, but I wasn't watching new stuff. And the truth is over the past couple of years, that has definitely shifted for me again. And I'm watching more current stuff. And like the last AEW pay-per-view was a perfect example. It's like I felt so good after watching the show.
Absolutely.
And it's like it's like what a great movie can do for you. It's like what a great album can do for you. You listen to music. So I think that there's something about the nature. It's like there are some people obviously that have the athletic gifts and the drive and whatever else it takes to get in the ring and do it. It's the same thing. It's like I play guitar. So it's like if I hear a song that I really like I'll go play that song, or, I'll write my own music or whatever the case may be influenced by that. But for me as a wrestling fan, instead of getting in the ring and, trying my hand at that, like the game really, I feel like is the next best thing to being able to just kind of, really shape your own stories, your own kind of professional wrestling world.
Of course.
And also to touch real quick on your territories, I'm envious because I tried that once upon a time and it just got too unwieldy for me.
It took me years to implement, but the online system saved me with because I thought, it's going to be too much, it's going to be overload, and it's just each show, like I have one for each day of the week. It's 4 weeks in a game month, and then 12 in a year. And we just continue. And I just, when I feel like playing, I do. And when I don't, I don't. But it was daunting in the beginning, but now I'm like, how do I continue this?
Well, I kind of had, it's funny because what I'm doing right now, like I said, I've got my sort of Midwestern, based territory that I'm running. And it's funny because it's not based on any real territory because I live in Chicago now, but like I had mentioned, I lived in Kansas City and St. Louis. So basically I run Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, I've got that little kind of, swath cut out, and those are the towns that I run. But I have a world heavyweight champion, and the world's heavyweight champion is a touring champion, so he only comes to my territory every once in a while. But I've devised ways to kind of like have stuff happen off screen, if you will. So that it still feels alive out there, but I'm not having to run like
all these 13
different territories or whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. I do the traveling champions. And so second week of the month, like my indie feds have their super cards. And then fourth week of the month, the legends have their super cards, and it's split and it goes on a rotation. So like say I'm running legends Monday, Wednesday, Friday. First quarter, world champion goes to the Monday, tag goes to the Wednesday, junior goes to the Friday. And then it just continues to rotate throughout the year. So even if there's a fifth week in a month, I don't play that week. I just skip ahead to the first week of the next month. And then like once a quarter, like I'll do like a super card, like every where legends and indie face each other.
Nice.
And so and it's the dream matches, like I did the Briscoes and the Briscoes, Jack Briscoe and Brian Danielson on another one,
Nice.
Things like that, and so I do like the Japanese tour at the beginning of the year. I do a Great American Bash, like the whole month is the tour. So to survive as a world champion during that month is incredibly difficult, so little things like that build up. And so I have these quarterly events like Crockett Cup. So now I have all these NWA ones, and the challenge is, how do I build these AWA ones now for the indies and give them their own flair and their own flavor? And I'm sure in 5 years, it'll look completely different,
Oh, absolutely.
And that's kind of the fun of the growth of it, is as more people come in, you know what I mean? You can rotate people in and out. You do fresh matchups. And that's what I like about the territory thing is, I can finally get, say, that Austin Idol Bob Backlund match, because Austin Idol, man, he conquered Memphis. Now he's coming to New York, and you could really do that and build it up that way. And let's talk about this, because the Memphis set is the most recently released set.
Yes.
This has been one that we know Travis Heckel has been a big part of, and one that him and I have been talking about a Memphis set for years. But the fact that it has come to fruition and that it is having the names that it's having, I mean, from Austin Idol and Bill Dundee down to Lanny Poffo, a wrestling card for Jimmy Hart, which adds a whole new element to that character.
Absolutely.
I mean, all the guys we've gotten top to bottom here, tag the fabulous ones. That was my number one with the Fabs. And they're here, the Moondogs. I mean, it is incredible. What are your thoughts on this set, and just how you've seen sets over the last year or two? I mean, the names we've gotten, from Stan Hansen to Bruiser Brody, even the first set coming online finally. That was a big one for people.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Just all these names, Kurt Angle, you know what I mean, coming to the game, Bob Backlund, the Briscoes. What are your thoughts on those things?
I think that we've been so fortunate over the past couple of years that, so much of the credit goes to the Legends team, and Mike Molesky, who's one of the, kind of the producers on making these connections with people, and getting, because the amazing thing that has started to happen more and more, which I don't feel like was as possible 20 years ago when the Legends first started, is that you kind of make one connection and it leads to the next guy, leads to the next guy, to the next guy. And Jerry Briscoe is such a perfect example of that, because once Jerry Briscoe signed on for he and his brother, it really did kind of, I mean, he is the one that we have to thank for Bob Backlund and Kurt Angle.
Wow, that's awesome.
And and there have been other people that have said, I can't name them, but there have been other people that have literally said, if it's good enough for the Briscoes,
it's
good enough for Jerry, it's good enough for me.
That's awesome.
And the thing that people, I think, need to understand, because it's really kind of this amazing gift that they give, is that 99% of everyone that is in the game doesn't get paid a dime. They're willingly giving this, and part of our whole mission is also just kind of preserving the legacy and the history of the business and of these amazing talents. And there's been this amazing connection that's been able to happen with the Tragos and Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, based out of Waterloo, Iowa, which has been extremely helpful. So, I just wanted to start by saying, like, we've had a lot of good fortune in making these connections with people that are able to, move us along to the next name on that wish list.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to some of these actual names, I will never forget when Chad showed me the piece of paper that had Kurt Angle's signature on it.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
incredible.
I was blown away. I thought
Yeah,
that's impossible. You know, when he
yeah,
told me about talking to Bob Backlund, I was just kind of, I literally never imagined a scenario where Bob Backlund would be in the game. It just wasn't even on
yeah,
my radar.
yeah.
And now he's one of my favorite guys to
Oh,
use,
he's
you know?
incredible.
Yeah. And so it's been, we've had these dream sets, you know, sets
Yeah.
that have, you know, to think that Kurt Angle and Bob Backlund came in the same set
Set,
of
the
cards,
same
you know?
set.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
you that and that reminds me too, and I had said this on the boards the other day. Look at how far Prime has come. I mean,
mhm.
Prime was just kind of extra guys, here and there. You can
Different
take it or
versions of
leave it.
people, maybe different gimmick
Prime
or
is must
something.
have.
Yeah,
Prime is
it
must
absolutely is.
have with the people we've gotten in Prime. It's unbelievable. And there's a place, and even the mid card guys that we have, the lower card. People wanted a Jake Milliman card. We got it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like
Oh,
a Kenny J card. We got it.
the
Like
enhancement talent is so
is
crucial.
incredible.
I mean, to my Fed in particular, it's so essential because I'm able, like Bob Backlund, for instance,
Yeah.
I was able to bring Bob Backlund into my Fed, and immediately he's facing like Kenny J, Jake Milliman, you know, Nacho
George
Barrera,
South,
yeah,
Nacho.
George South, yeah, and the thing is like obviously he's dominating these guys,
Yeah.
but it helped me to in that in that fictional world in my
Yeah.
head build Backlund up, get these wins, look
Yeah.
dominant, and then start to take on you know the mid card like the Bobby Shanes and the some
Yeah.
of these other guys, and it just was a really nice way to build him
Yeah.
that in a way that felt real. um
Yeah.
so there's like you say there's a place for everyone, and it's
Yeah.
funny because every once in a while you'll have guys say, why do you want me in your game? And
Yeah.
and Mike's pat answer, which has become my pat answer, is like, we want everybody. Like we want
Yeah.
everybody we can possibly get.
Yeah.
And I've had the good fortune of reaching out to like one of the people for the Memphis set, Lance Russell. I was able to get in contact with his son, and his son, granted us the permission to use Lance. And because there was this moment when, we looked at who we had for Memphis,
Yeah.
and there weren't really any gaps, but there were a couple of question marks. The Moondogs, for instance, came late in the process.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know for sure who we were going to have, how many. Dutch Mantel, he came late in the process.
Yeah.
So like when you have some of those question marks, you just start saying like, well, let's start reaching out to people and see what happens. And yeah, and I just immediately I was like, okay, if we're gonna do this set, not a wrestler, we should try to get Lance Russell, because like you can't
have Memphis without Lance Russell.
So I was lucky enough to get Lance signed into the game, and the card I think is going to be a heck of a lot of fun. Because that's the other cool thing. We've talked about a lot of the wrestlers. Some of the other talent, the on-air talent that we have is so cool. We've got a Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan.
Oh, I love that
card,
primetime wrestling card, right?
It's and the thing is it's like the creativity that goes behind the creation of some of these cards. Like one of the mechanics on the Gorilla and Bobby card that I love is it literally has an option to throw to a match that's in progress. How cool is that? Like we've never done anything like that before.
That's so great.
Yeah. So I feel like in a weird way, and I've heard this from other game companies and other properties that are out there that have kind of experienced similar things. Really over this past, these past like almost 2 years now that we've been living under this pandemic, I think people have been so hungry for those creative outlets. And dealing with the quite frankly, the trauma of what has surrounded us.
Of course.
That we've seen kind of this explosion in people buying board games, getting into RPGs, getting into, whatever the case may be.
Something
and I don't
to do with their time.
Exactly. And I don't think Phil Singer Games is any different. We've seen growth. And as a result of that, I think it's invigorated the people behind the scenes to chase those big names that maybe we weren't really chasing, that long ago. And to also try to innovate some new mechanics and try some new things and in the cards. And it's a testament, I think, to the foundation that came before. So this Memphis set, the cool thing about it for me is that they're the talent right off the bat, the fabulous ones, you know,
Yeah.
getting Steve Kern signed. We already had Stan Lane in the game, but
Yeah.
to bring Kern in was so big, and I was so
Yeah.
excited to hear about him. You know, even just as a utility guy, as a Florida guy, as wherever you want to
Yeah.
put him. There's a great documentary on. I almost always say the network, but it doesn't exist anymore, on Peacock,
Yeah.
about Florida Championship Wrestling. You know,
Yeah.
basically before it was NXT, it was this,
Yeah.
and he
FCW.
plays such
Yeah.
a huge part in that because he was running FCW,
Yeah.
and that was really like seeing him in that gave me a whole new respect for him, just as a human being and as this creative mind. And so he's someone that I am just thrilled to have in the game. And the Fabulous
Yeah.
Ones are honestly one of the most important tag teams in Memphis history.
Yeah.
Then you've got the Moondogs to immediately feud them with, which will be
Yeah.
awesome. Getting guys like Bill Dundee and Tracy Smothers in color.
Yeah.
Getting Dutch Mantel into the game. Dutch Mantel, one of the coolest things about Mantel is like, this is a guy that had a face versus face feud in Memphis against Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
And won.
And won the feud.
Yeah. I mean, that is just like, there's nobody else could do that.
No.
And so I mean, right there, that's just amazing. And then you factor in like PG-13, JC Ice and Wolfie D in Legends Prime. And the cool thing is like those guys were, first of all, so underrated.
Oh, and
on a national level, but in Memphis,
came like 15 years too late.
Right.
If they would have came now, they'd be, you know what I mean, because of their size.
Exactly. And you look at some of the stuff that they were doing in the ring, and nobody else was really doing some of that stuff.
No, they were innovative.
And it was dictated, I think, by their size. But they were the most dominant tag team of the twilight period of Memphis wrestling. 16-time champs in the USWA, and had a stint in ECW, had a short stint, stay in WWF even. So
part of the original Nation of Domination.
That's right. JCI is wrapping them to the ring.
Well, and again, take a look at the precursor of that, right? What did make John Cena big? Right. Was that type of gimmick, and so it's incredible to see how ahead of their time those guys were.
And another name I'm really excited about in this Memphis set is Brickhouse Brown. A guy who sadly I think falls under the radar, and again, his size had a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
But you watch his promos. You look at, I mean, this is important to some people. It's not that important to me, but you look at his body, his physique, and then you look at his work in the ring. Like, absolutely. The only thing that guy was missing to make it in New York was about 4 inches.
Oh, he absolutely. He had a great look. I mean, he could talk, and he's another guy, and it's so funny too because to see the love that he had gotten, before his passing, was really, really nice to see. So to have the legacy of people honored, I think is really, really cool. And when I think of Brickhouse Brown, I think of, one of his great feuds was against the Iceman, King Parsons, right? And kind of when that beginning of the USWA. And that leads me to the dream lists. Obviously, we know about the big guys that everybody wants, right? You know what I mean? You can nail a big guy, but there's so many people, and maybe I'm stuck in Texas right now. I've been watching World Class chronologically. I'm in 1985 right now.
Oh, nice.
And so doing like the whole deep dive, but I'm like, man, how about the Iceman as a guy? And then I look at guys like Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Even a guy like a Brian Adias. You know what I mean? Guys like that. And then you start to look at other territories and you're like, oh, like a Terry Taylor, you know what I mean? Folks like that, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh man. So I think we're just at the beginning, but who are some of the guys that you're like, oh, not really a top guy, but I would love to have this guy. Obviously I'm not looking for you to give anything away, but like your personal dream list of like, oh, this guy would be great.
That's such an interesting question because I'll be honest with you. My list, number one with a bullet, is Bret Hart, and so like I tend to, when I'm thinking of my wish list, put those types of names on there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But when you're thinking about guys that might not necessarily be that level,
Yeah.
it does get a little bit more difficult. A name that just popped into my head would be Mark Rollerball Rocco from UK.
Yeah.
I'd love for us to have some more UK names. We've got Johnny Saint, we've got
Yeah.
Adrian Street,
Yeah.
which you were talking about.
Finley in his UK
Yes,
garb, which
right.
I loved. I love
Yeah,
that you guys
he's got
did
the
that.
mullet and the
Yeah. Oh, it's great.
no, I love that card, and I love those guys, and I think that also the great thing is that Saint and Street are both prime names. So you were talking
Yeah.
about how essential it is, and
How
it's
essential the
true.
prime has become. Yeah, they came in
Yeah,
prime. Dave Taylor was another
Dave
great
Taylor.
name in that set, right? That
Yep.
British connection. But yeah, I liked how you said about Rollerball Rocco, because that's a very versatile card. You can get him as Rollerball, you can get him as Black Tiger, maybe.
Right.
There's some interesting things you can do with a Mark Rocco card.
Yeah, so I would love to, international. I worked a lot on the new Indies set, which is a
Yeah.
Women of the Indies International
Yes,
edition.
which is fantastic names in there, by the way.
Yeah.
Even the prime names, it was, doing a little reading on them. And I think that's the thing, if you allow yourself, I know poor Bazzi doesn't know who anybody is, but, but he knew the women's names,
Yeah.
and just seeing these names and reading about them, I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? And even, again, that's where the card art, I think, adds a lot too, because, oh, this person has a cool look. I've never heard of them,
Yes.
And you look them up. But yeah, I like what you're saying about the international names. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just love for us to be able to track more of those names down. There's a lot of vintage guys out there that I would love to see.
Yeah.
When we were talking about the Memphis set, the two names that immediately for me, I own a T-shirt with them on it. Immediately, I was like, I want Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks.
Yeah.
I was like, I want those guys so bad, and
absolutely.
so I think that those would definitely be on my wish list that might fly a little under the radar.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to see some West Coast names. Obviously, like the big dream one being like Pat Patterson, because we've got Ray Stevens.
We already got Ray Stevens, right? But Pat Patterson's a big one.
And to get like a color Pepper Gomez and John Tolos and Freddie Blassie, and, you know what I mean? Just put together that that sort of big time San Francisco territory would be really cool.
Chavo Guerrero, right? Another guy in that San Francisco, LA area. Eddie Mansfield, right? You know what I mean? You had so many guys that were good, even a big name, and I know that some of these guys were kind of like one-time deals, but there's still that dream of guys like Mil Mascaras, coming to the color sets and things like that. But
gosh, some of those lucha names, some of those I would love to get, like Blue Demon or Santo or even more current guys. There's so many just wonderful workers, and then obviously if you start talking about Japan, and it's like, oh my gosh, give me Fujinami,
I know.
Some guys that I would just like do just about anything to have. Obviously I'm a big all Japan 90s guy, so Misawa, Kobashi, I
would fall over.
Right?
I would literally tip over in my chair. We got those names, forget it. I'd be done. It's so incredible just to even dream about the possibility of that happening. But then I look at like the Kurt Angle thing, and it's just like, you just never know.
In a million years. So never know. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. And I think that's the great thing about it is just the deep roster, the eclectic nature of it. There's guys from so many different styles, eras. One thing that I've looked forward to and I'd like to see is kind of that like golden era set, like that 50s and 60s. Because there's so many great names already in the game, but I can think of a team that is the Kangaroos, getting them in color. You know what I mean? And
they're my tag champs, and they've been so dominant. They've been like for almost a year. They've been, if not champs the whole time. I think they had one where they dropped the titles for a short window, but they've basically been at the top for a whole year. The
first few years I played and had those cards, they were undefeated for years. Like nobody beat them. the Road
Yeah,
Warriors
they're
could not beat
stacked.
them. Nobody could beat them. And finally, Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton got them. But it
Nice.
took like 4 years to get to that point, you know.
Oh
Like,
man, that's wild.
but I love the things like that, you know, these stories that you weave. But you know, even going to like Golden Era, you know, Sweet Daddy Siki is a name I would love to see. You know, what a tremendous, not just character, but you know, really a barrier breaker in so many ways.
Yeah.
You know, guys like that, you know, so I mean, there's so many options that you can do, and I think the love of all this different kind of wrestling. There is something for every type of wrestling fan.
Yes.
If you're a sci-fi fan, there's so many good things. So folks, we want to thank Sam for coming on today. We've talked some Phil Singer games. Go to philsingergames.com. Check it out. If you grew up reading the magazines and you saw the ads and you love real life wrestling, you love the legends, you love the sci-fi, whatever, or you're a big indie fan today, like I said, which has so many of your favorite AEW and WWE stars, plus the top indie names of today that are making it. You know, so many good things. So check it out for sure. It's a great card and dice game. You can play online. But get that information on at philsingergames.com. But thank you, Sam, for joining us today. We're going to be back for another great episode with you, and hopefully you'll join us. So remember, follow us at Wrestler Weekly, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And as the great Bill Apter says, we will see you at the matches.